Hey everybody, this is TJR. A lot of people have been asking me what I think of the whole Gibson guitar situation that's been going on in the news recently. And if you're not familiar, Gibson Guitars sits alongside Fender Guitars as one of the most iconic guitar brands in the entire world. Their models, the Les Paul, the Flying V, the Explorer, these are iconic models, oftentimes imitated by other manufacturers, but they are in some serious financial trouble right now. Gibson Guitars owes $375 million of senior secured notes that they need to refinance, and it has another $145 million in bank loans that are due immediately if those notes are not refinanced by July. This has many people asking what's going to happen, and many predicting that the company could go bankrupt, that it could mean the end of Gibson Guitars, or at least the end of Gibson Guitars as we currently know it. Now, Gibson has issued a statement, a public statement, that they are currently undergoing a streamlining strategy and that they will improve their whole financial situation. This streamlining will allow them to pay back their debts within 7 years. This could all just be talk. Then again, it could end up actually happening. Honestly, myself, I have not owned a Gibson guitar in a very, very long time. When I was a very wee lad, I did actually own, very briefly, a Gibson Les Paul, and I stress only owned it very briefly. I ruined that Les Paul guitar when I was a young teenager, and I'm still paying for that sin today. But that's a story for another day. Perhaps I will get to that at some time. I have to admit to actually being, honestly, kind of out of the loop when it comes to Gibson Guitar as a brand, but this news about a possible bankruptcy has kind of opened up my eyes, and I've done some research, I've done a lot of reading, I've also listened to a lot of excellent YouTube commentaries on this very subject. The one thing that I keep seeing is a tremendous upswell over the last several years, of dislike towards Gibson as a company and as a guitar manufacturer. And a great deal of this dislike or hatred, whatever you want to call it, has come from guitarists. It's come from musicians. One of the primary complaints I read is that their guitars are just too damn expensive for most working musicians and even most pro musicians, and that by and large the only people that can afford them are just the extremely elite rich rock stars, which are a dying breed, and doctors and lawyers who collect these things. And, you know, I decided to look at a catalog here this is from Sweetwater Music here, and I decided to just take a look at, what Gibson guitars are going for. And believe me, I've noticed that over the years that their guitars tend to go for outrageous amounts, $3,000, $4,000, $7,000. And I sometimes looked at catalogs and thought, well, who can afford these things, But as I look at their other manufacturers, I look at like Fender Guitars, and I see, well, they've got their high-end models that, that go for expensive prices. Fender has some of their custom shop models that go for $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. They've got their pro models, which tend to go for about between $1,000 to $2,000. Then they've got their I would say, probably the models that go for around anywhere between $500 and $800. And these are still pro instruments that I think most working class musicians would use. These are the models that, musicians who gig a lot regularly would use, studio musicians, musicians who are sidemen for national touring acts, that sort of thing. And, a lot of today's touring national rock acts. And they've got those guitars. They've got their Squire line of guitars, which is more for the beginners. This is for the people who want to start playing guitar. These guitars tend to run for $200 to $300 to $400 on average. And so these are the guitars that maybe parents buy their kids who want to start playing, or that just adults purchase if they are wanting to learn how to play some guitar but not sure they're serious yet about it. And I see other manufacturers like Gretsch doing pretty much the same thing. They have their entry level, they have their midline pro guitars for those that work all the time, and then they have the really high-end stuff for either the the very affluent musicians, elite pro musicians, huge rock stars, and of course the very rich collectors. For all of these companies, the bread and butter it's got to be both the midline instruments for the working professional and the entry level instruments for the beginners. That's got to be their bread and butter, with the high end stuff being their elite brands. But so I understand this complaint about Gibson's being expensive, but then as I look at the various instruments in this catalog, Gibson owns Epiphone, and Epiphone is where they have their entry-level guitars that start at $200 to their midline, midline guitars for the working musicians. And these will say, these will be Epiphone versions of the Les Paul, the Explorer, the Flying V. These will be the guitars that run between $500 to $800 approximately, right around that price range. So Gibson is doing what the other guitar manufacturers are doing insofar as having these different tiers of guitars that they sell. But the other thing, though, that I'm hearing about Gibson that I'm not hearing about, say, Fender or Gretsch or Taylor or Paul Reed Smith or any of the other major manufacturers, is that people are very upset about the quality of the high-end Gibson guitars. They're saying the quality just isn't there to warrant the price. I have very little trouble believing this. For many years, I will wander into music stores, guitar shops, go into Guitar Center, and just for fun pull out a guitar off the rack and just try it out. And every once in a while I would pull a Les Paul out that was, a couple grand, they'd leave within reach of someone like me to be able to mess around with. And sometimes I say, man, these things, they weigh a ton, they're heavy. Who could want to wear this? If you're playing like for an hour or any longer than an hour, why would you want to wear this on your shoulder? I mean, me, I'm sometimes playing, back in the day, I was playing, 3 and 4 hour gigs, It's like, why would you put this on your shoulder? It's so heavy. And I'd play like, this doesn't seem to play very well, and I'm having trouble keeping it in tune. And I was just kind of like, man, I don't understand this. And I'm finding out now that I've done some internet research that I'm not the only one who has felt this way. And I've, like I said, don't own these. I've just tried them off the shelf. So I kind of can see that maybe, like I said, the quality is not warranting the price. So that's definitely an issue there. I also understand that about a year or so ago, Gibson began this policy of all their guitars had these automatic tuning pegs. I remember first hearing about this. Jimmy Page had like a custom Les Paul made for him that the strings would automatically tune. I think this was back in the 90s. He'd push a button and it would go into a certain tuning for him. They started to make this a standard recently, and I guess it didn't really work very well. I guess there were a lot of problems when musicians tried to use it in practical use live. Also, they came out with a whole bunch of models in the last year or so. Now, I'll be honest, I looked at some of these. Some of these models I thought looked pretty cool, but of course they were way out of my price range. I really liked, especially the look of the new Flying V. Has a very kind of retro future look to it. I thought it looked very cool, but once again, way out of my price range. We're talking $4,000 or $5,000. I can't afford a guitar like that. The other thing that I started to hear about that I was not aware of, once again, because I'd been kind of out of the loop on Gibson as a company because I just wasn't using their guitars, was that they had invested quite a lot of money in consumer electronics, and even stated recently that, we're not a guitar manufacturer, we are a music lifestyle company, and they wanted to break into consumer electronics. Apparently, they've invested a ton of money, and it hasn't really quite worked out yet. Not much has happened with it. They released some custom speakers that were way overpriced that looked like, had kind of the finishes of their Les Pauls. Apparently, that hasn't done well. I know that this is nothing new, though. I mean, some of these companies are trying to diversify because guitars haven't sold as well as they used to, and I'll get into that in a moment. Marshall, for instance, the iconic, brand name amplifier, they released a series of Bluetooth speakers and also headphones. And I remember being in a Best Buy store and comparing those headphones to other headphones, and I thought the Marshall headphones sounded really good, primarily when you plug them into the Marshall Bluetooth speaker. I thought the sound quality was just amazing. I really liked it. At the time, I couldn't afford it, though. Not hearing as much about those now. I don't know if Marshall maybe is getting out of that. I don't know. I also don't know how well they're doing in amplifier sales either. Fender at this year's NAMM show premiered their line of Fender Bluetooth speakers, and these are just Bluetooth speakers like you would find in any consumer electronics like Bose or JBL or Beats, any of those Bluetooth speakers. They just have have the Fender logo, look a little bit like a Fender amplifier. It's more of a style thing, to be honest. And all of this diversification, getting into consumer electronics. A lot of people look at this and they say, well, this is another reason why Gibson is seeing these problems. Simply put, the reason for this diversification is that people aren't buying guitars like they used to. Kids don't want to be rock guitarists like they did in the 60s or the 70s or even the 80s. There is some truth to this. Anthony Fantano on the Needle Drop channel did a great commentary on this, and he felt it reflected the current decline of rock and roll, which I can certainly understand and agree with to a certain extent, because these days a kid doesn't have to spend at least a year of solid hard work learning how to play guitar before he can play it well enough that someone wants to hear it, in order to get into making music. A kid can just fire up his computer, have some software, music creation software, paste together some loops and some beats. Maybe if they want to get really creative, they can go into those MIDI loops and do some editing to make it more unique sounding. Throw on a vocal or a rap, and they've got a song now they can upload to SoundCloud. So the threshold is not as tough anymore, and you don't have to learn how to play a musical instrument in order to do that. And I do, like I said, kind of see this, but then I also look at a company like Taylor Guitars. Now, I use Taylor Guitars primarily. I've been using two Taylor T5s, which are electric acoustic hybrids. You can use them both plugged into a PA acoustically. You can plug them into a guitar amp and use it as an electric guitar too. I've been very happy with those guitars. I also have my Charvel Strat and my Taylor GS Mini. Now, Taylor is an upscale guitar company. They're a upscale brand name. The majority of their guitars are in that $1,500 to $2,000 price range. And they do have, of course, their higher end models that go for $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. They definitely have those too. Their entry-level instruments are like the Academy series, which start at around $599. That's their price range for a more entry-level guitar. And the GS Minis, which are about roughly $300-$400 roughly, I believe. Don't quote me on that. They also have their baby guitars, baby Taylors, which are for children, which are much smaller, and they charge a bit less for than, say, the GS Minis. But everything they do is very high-end. Now, their product is considered a luxury product, yet during the recession, they thrived. They actually had to hire people. And so, now granted, Taylor makes acoustic guitars. They've had a few flirtations with solid body electrics, which has mainly been acoustics. Gibson makes both electric and acoustics, but Taylor has always maintained a high level of quality. I've never heard people complain about the Taylor guitars. I have heard people complain about the Gibson guitars. So, once again, I don't know if people not wanting to be musicians is that strong of an argument. Once again, I think it comes more down to the actual quality and the complaints about quality that I've been reading about. And all the complaints about their high-end products has many people saying, well, it's because they don't treat employees very well, so therefore it's really hard to keep the really good people there. They go work somewhere else. Now, that's all subjective. This may very well be true, but I haven't really found enough information or evidence to prove that. I haven't read enough testimonials. Of course, many people probably don't want to talk. That's not uncommon. So the question remains, what happens with Gibson Guitars? Well, two possible outcomes. One, they are able to refinance like they say and continue. And if so, this streamlining strategy that they're referring to in their press release, well, they better be really serious about it. They need to become a leaner, meaner Gibson guitar company. Now they've got their Epiphone brand for the low-cost entry-level instruments, and interestingly enough, I don't hear a whole lot of complaints about the Epiphone brand. Not many complaints about that. I think that's very telling. They have their custom shop, of course, for the really high-end stuff that's like $5,000, $7,000. That's fine. But where they really need to focus on is on their professional models that working musicians want to be able to use. They need to concentrate on just their primary, 4 to 5 models, the Les Paul, the special, those instruments. They need to get these instruments high quality in a range that professional musicians can afford. And just like all the other companies, somewhere between $1,000 to $2,000, somewhere in that price range, where you can get a Les Paul in that price range. This is affordable for professional musicians, at least as long as they can get special financing. And Guitar Center provides that, Musician's Friends provides that, Sweetwater Music provides that, where you can get that financing through their credit cards, 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, depending on what specials they're running, and you can afford to buy one of those instruments. And for the working musician, that's doable. But that's where they really need to concentrate, is make these guitars as quality as they can and keep them in that price range. And that's what the other major guitar companies seem to be able to do. Fender, Gretsch, Taylor, they all seem to be able to do that, and without getting into any trouble with the Justice Department. And yes, there was that whole debacle a while back that I won't get into too much, but at the end of the day, I don't think that had much to do with it. The fines they paid were a drop in the bucket compared to their revenues. Now, the other scenario is that they're not able to refinance and they face bankruptcy. Is this the end of Gibson Guitars? I would think no. It is a legendary, iconic brand name. I find it hard to believe that nobody will step in and buy it. It's too iconic of a name. Someone, I think, will step in and buy it, but hopefully they won't cheapen the brand. Hopefully they will, like I said, make it a leaner, meaner company, keep the Epiphone for the beginners, keep the high-end for the collectors, but really concentrate on the pro models and keep them once again in that price range. This is TJR. What do you think about this? Maybe you know some things about this that I don't. I don't claim to know everything about this. I don't claim to be an expert. Please share your thoughts and opinions on this. Be interested in reading what you have to say about all of this. As always, please subscribe to the channel. And if you do subscribe, be sure to click notifications so you can know when I make new videos. Thanks everybody for watching. Bye.